The wind howled outside Jake's farmhouse. Dust blew across the empty plains of planet Verisex. It was a quiet night, like most nights on this remote farming colony. Jake sat alone at his dinner table, sipping hot broth. The heater buzzed softly. In the corner, and his dog, Rusty, snored near the fireplace. Everything was still, calm, and cold. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, like a mistake. Then it came again, louder, more desperate. Jake stood up, confused, holding his old plasma rifle. No one ever came here. Not at this hour, not on this planet. He moved toward the door slowly, heart pounding. He opened it just a crack and looked out. What he saw made him freeze. A woman, no an alien female, stood outside in the freezing wind. She was thin, shaking, and wrapped in rags. Her arms cradled something close to her chest. It was a child, a small alien girl, no more than 4 years old, her skin pale and her lips blue. The mother looked up at Jake with wide, glowing eyes full of fear and hope. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Please, just feed my daughter, human. I'll stay quiet, I'll cook, I'll stay in your bed if I must. But don't let her starve." Jake blinked, not sure if he'd heard right. He looked around for a trick, a trap, anything. But there was nothing. Just this broken woman and her dying child. He lowered the rifle slowly. "Come inside," he said. The woman nodded, stepping in carefully like a shadow. Jake closed the door behind her, locking it. The warmth of the room hit the child first, and her little body shivered hard. The mother looked around. Scared but silent, she didn't sit, didn't ask for anything more. She just stood, waiting for permission. Jake pointed to a soft rug near the heater. "You can rest there," he said. The woman nodded again and sat down, holding the child. In her lap, she rubbed the girl's arms and legs, trying to bring warmth back into her. Jake moved to the kitchen and grabbed some leftover stew. He placed it in front of them. The mother didn't touch it. She helped the girl eat, first spoon by spoon, slowly and carefully. Only when the child had eaten enough did she sip a little herself. Her hands shook as she held the bowl. Jake watched in silence. He had seen refugees before, but never like this. There was something strange, something heartbreaking about them. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked up, hesitated, then said softly, "Raya." Jake looked at the little girl, now curled up and sleepy. "She's Melly," Raya added, voice barely a whisper. Jake sat down across from them, unsure of what to do. He wasn't the kind of man to take in strangers, especially not alien ones. But something about Raya's eyes haunted him. Not just fear, but a kind of silent scream inside her. He remembered that look from war refugees during the fall of Titan Outpost. He had seen mothers begging like that before, only back then. "No one listened. You don't need to stay in my bed," Jake said quietly. Raya's head lowered, her cheeks burning with shame. I didn't mean to insult," she said quickly. "I thought that's what you'd want in return." Jake shook his head. "I just don't let kids starve, that's all." Silence hung in the room for a while. Rusty woke up and walked over. Sniffing Raya's hand, she flinched, but Melly giggled and patted the dog gently. It was the first sound of happiness Jake had heard in weeks. He smiled a little, then stood up. "There's a spare room down the hall," he said. "You and the girl can sleep there tonight." Raya looked at him like he was speaking another language. "A room. A real bed," she whispered. Jake nodded. "It's not much, but it's warm." She helped Melly to her feet and followed Jake. Before going in, she turned to face him again. Her voice cracked as she said, "Thank you, human." "I don't know why." "But thank you." Jake didn't reply. He just watched the door close behind them and stood in silence. He didn't know what he had just invited into his home. But something deep in his chest told him this wasn't the end of something. It Was the beginning, the morning sun on Vera 6, was weak and pale. It didn't rise like it did on Earth. It just sort of crept in. Slow and quiet. Jake rubbed his eyes and sat up from his old bed. The night before still felt like a strange dream. Had an alien woman and her child really knocked on his door begging for food? Had he actually let them in? He stepped into the hallway and paused outside the spare room. He didn't hear a sound for a second. He thought maybe they'd left in the night. But when he opened the door, he stopped cold. The room had been cleaned. Not just tidy, but truly cleaned. The floors had been swept, the broken light fixed. And even his old tools were now neatly arranged in the corner. Raya sat beside the bed, where Melly still slept, her head turned sharply when Jake entered. Her eyes alert, like a wild animal ready to run, but then she relaxed and looked down, saying nothing. "You didn't sleep?" Jake asked. Raya just shook her head. "I had time," she whispered. "So I cleaned." Jake nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. It wasn't just cleaning, it was care. She had made the room livable again. He walked out quietly and let them rest a bit more by the time he returned to the kitchen. The smell of food greeted him. Raya had found the ingredients he kept in his storeroom. She was cooking something warm and rich, better than anything Jake had made in weeks. He looked at her, confused. "You cooked this?" She nodded once, not meeting his eyes. "I said I'd work," she whispered. "I'll earn our stay." Jake sat at the table, unsure whether to accept or argue. But then he tasted the food, and it was good. Better than Gadit reminded him of something from home, not Earth, maybe, but a place where warmth and safety still existed. He looked over at Melly, who now sat quietly eating small bites. Her cheeks were fuller already, her eyes brighter. The silence in the house wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, but strange. Raya never spoke unless spoken to. She didn't ask questions. Didn't show emotion. She moved like a machine, cleaning, cooking, fixing small things around the house. Jake noticed a bent pipe in the greenhouse, now fully repaired. A cracked solar panel now straightened and reinforced. And the water filter, broken for 2 years, was now humming quietly. Fixed, she was brilliant. That much was clear. But something inside her was broken, not just scared, not just hiding, shattered. Jake tried talking to her, gently at first. "Where did you learn to fix things like that?" Raya shrugged. "Used to work with tech before." Before Melly, Jake nodded, trying not to press too hard. He wanted to ask about her past, about why she came here, why she offered herself so quickly and desperately. But the way her hands tightened around the cloth she was folding told him don't ask yet. That evening, Melly played quietly with Rusty in the living room. The dog barked happily as the little girl threw him scraps of old cloth-like toys. Jake sat nearby, sipping tea. Raya stood in the kitchen, wiping the same plate over and over. He finally said, "You don't have to act like a servant." She paused, not turning around. "It's how I stay useful," she whispered. Jake stood up and walked closer. "You're not a burden," he said. "You've saved my farm systems." In one day, Raya said nothing, but her shoulders shook slightly. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He heard a soft sound coming from the hallway. He stepped out and saw Raya sitting alone in the corner, head down, holding her knees. She didn't cry loudly, just trembled in silence. He didn't speak, just sat nearby. After a while, she whispered, "I used to work on warships, fixing energy cores. I was good at it." Jake nodded, letting her go on. "Then came the Empire. They took our homes, our names, our pride." Her voice broke. "They wanted women for birthing." Not thinking, she turned her head. "I escaped with Melly, but it cost everything." Jake saw tears on her cheeks now. She looked up, her eyes glassy and tired. "I offered you everything because I thought it was the only way. The only thing I had left to give." Jake knelt down beside her. "You have value beyond that," he said firmly. "I don't want your silence or your service or your bed. I want you and your daughter safe." Raya stared at him. Stunned, no one had ever said that to her, not since she was taken, not since she became less than a person in their eyes. She nodded slowly, her voice broke again, this time soft and full of emotion. "Then I'll stay and I'll work. Not because I must, but because I want to." Jake offered a blanket and helped her up. Together, they walked back toward the living room. Rusty snored on the rug. Melly slept peacefully nearby. And for the first time since the knock at midnight, the house felt like a home. The sky above Jake's farm turned red that morning. Not with sunrise, but with warning. 2 small Empire patrol ships flew low across the field, their engines roaring like hungry beasts. Jake dropped the tool in his hand and looked up. Raya was inside feeding Melly, unaware of the danger speeding toward them. Jake's heart thudded. Empire ships didn't just pass by when they came. They came for something or someone. He ran inside, fast and serious. "Raya," he called, "get to the cellar." Now, she looked at him with wide eyes, holding Melly close. "They found us?" she asked, voice trembling. "I don't know, but we can't risk it," Jake said. Already opening the floor panel to the old emergency shelter below the living room, it wasn't much, just a few meters of space with air vents and a solar light, but it would have to do. Raya slid down. Holding her daughter, Jake paused, then passed her a piece of dry food and a blanket. "Don't make a sound," he whispered. Then he shut the panel and stood, breathing heavily. Just as a sharp knock hit the door, 3 soldiers stood outside, armored and cold. Their helmets were smooth and silver, their rifles ready. Jake stepped out slowly, arms raised, "Morning." He said casually. The lead soldier didn't smile. "Empty your home, human. We're searching for escaped fugitives." Jake shrugged. "Just me and my dog here," he said. Didn't even know anyone was missing. One soldier pushed past him without asking. Another walked around the back, checking windows. The third stood near Jake, scanning his face. "You live alone, out here in the middle of nowhere?" the soldier asked. Jake nodded. Always liked the quiet. The soldier stared a little longer, then turned as the one inside returned. "Nothing." The soldier said, "Place is a mess, but..." "Empty?" Jake forced a laugh. "Messy? You should have seen it last month." The soldiers gave him one last look, then returned to their ship. It took off with a sharp hum. Vanishing into the morning sky, Jake didn't move until the sound disappeared completely. Then he rushed back. Inside, knelt, and opened the floor panel. Raya sat in the dark, holding Melly tightly, her eyes shining with fear. "They came." "They were here," she whispered, her voice shaking. Jake nodded and helped them out. "They didn't find anything," he said softly, "but we can't pretend anymore." That night, the 3 of them sat at the table in silence. Rusty lay near the door, sensing the tension in the room. Jake looked across at Raya, who was holding Melly's hand tightly. "I need to know what they want," he said. "Why are they hunting you?" Raya took a breath, long and deep. "I was born in Sector 9 of the Dusk Colonies," she said slowly. "Engineers were taken by the Empire, forced to build things for them. War machines, power cores, defense towers." She stared at her own hands. "I fixed things for them, things that killed thousands when I got pregnant. They marked me as breeding stock and took me off the project." Jake's fists clenched. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His silence said enough. "I escaped with Melly," Raya continued. "But others didn't. They want me because I know how their machines work, or maybe just to punish me for running." Melly tugged on her sleeve, whispering softly, "Mommy, are we going to be taken again?" Jake stood suddenly and left the table. He came back with an old box and placed it down with a thud. Inside were parts metal panels. Wiring solar nodes, scrap tech. I've been collecting this for years, Jake said. I didn't know. What for? But maybe now I do. Raya looked confused. Jake leaned closer. If they come back, we fight, he said. But not with guns. With defenses traps, shields, anything you can build. She stared at him, her eyes wide. You'd risk your life for us? She asked. Jake didn't blink. I already did, he said, and I'll do it again. That night, they didn't sleep. Jake and Raya worked side by side, turning scraps into shields, wires into motion detectors. They moved like a team, silent. Focused, determined, Raya's hands moved fast. Her mind sharper than any soldier's weapon. Jake felt something shift inside him. Something more than just protection. It was connection. It was trust. It was something dangerously close to love. At sunrise. The farm was still the same from the outside, but underneath the soil, behind the walls. In every wire and circuit was something new. A mother's fear, a daughter's hope, and a human's promise. If the Empire came again, they wouldn't find prey, they'd find a storm. Asterisk, the morning after the soldiers came. Jake found Raya standing in the greenhouse. She was holding a rusted energy coil in one hand and a wrench in the other. Sunlight touched her face as she studied the broken circuit. Her long fingers moved carefully, her eyes sharp, focused. It was the first time Jake truly saw her not just as a mother or a fugitive, but as a builder, a mind that had once powered machines of war. He stood quietly, watching her work. You don't just fix things. He finally said, you make them better. Raya looked up, startled for a second, then returned to her work. I used to make things for the Empire, she said softly, but now maybe I can make something to protect instead of destroy. Jake stepped closer, wiping sweat from his forehead. I've got more tools in the barn, he offered. She nodded once, her eyes still fixed on the coil. Bring me the copper wire and any broken combs you have. Her voice had changed, not timid, not fearful. It was the voice of someone who had once been in charge of machines more powerful than this entire farm. Later that day, Melly sat on the grass. Drawing shapes in the dirt, Rusty played beside her, barking softly as he chased bugs inside the workshop. Raya bent over a table covered in parts. Jake handed her a datapad with old blueprints. You can understand this stuff? He asked. Raya didn't even glance up. This is child's play, she said. Then caught herself. Sorry, I didn't mean to insult. Jake laughed. No offense taken. I'm just glad someone here knows what they're doing. As the sun dropped, the air grew cooler. Jake noticed a long scar running from Raya's shoulder down her arm as she reached for a cable. He had seen it before, always hidden under her sleeves. But now, in the warm light, it was clear, deep, and jagged. He said nothing for a while, just handed her the next tool. Then, quietly, he asked, Did they do that to you? Raya's hands froze. She didn't look at him, but her voice was quiet and firm. Yes. Jake didn't push further. Instead, he moved beside her and started helping with the wiring. They worked in silence again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was steady. Like music without sound, that night they sat together on the porch. Melly was asleep inside, and the stars above Vera 6 were unusually bright. Raya sipped warm broth from a small metal cup, her body wrapped in a blanket. Jake leaned back, boots resting on the railing. You know, he said, you never have to pay me with work or promises. Raya looked at him slowly. I know now, she whispered. But back then, when I knocked, I thought it was the only thing I had left. Jake nodded. People lose their homes, their freedom, their dignity, he said, but they still deserve kindness. Raya closed her eyes. No one's been kind in a long time, she said. Not since Melly's father died. Jake didn't speak. He let the wind fill the silence between them. Finally, she opened her eyes again, looking at him with something different, now less fear, more weight. "Why are you really helping us?" she asked. "You could have turned us in and earned credits." Jake thought for a moment, then shrugged. "Because someone once saved me too." He paused. "Remembering the ruins of Earth's eastern front, I was wounded, left behind in a crater. A stranger dragged me to safety. He didn't ask what side I fought for. He just saved me. I figured maybe it was my turn." Raya looked down at her hands again. "They wanted me to fix their war machines," she said, "and when I got pregnant, they called me defective. They branded me." She pulled back the collar of her shirt, revealing a faint, burned-in mark on her shoulder. Jake clenched his jaw, but said nothing. She covered it again quickly. "Ashamed. I'm not defective." She said quietly, "I'm a mother. I'm an engineer. I'm more than what they tried to reduce me to." Jake placed a hand gently on the table, near hers but not touching. "I see all of that," he said. "You don't have to prove it." For the first time, Raya smiled, not fully, not brightly, but real, and that was enough. The next morning, Jake found something new in the barn. Raya had built a small power generator from scrap, efficient, quiet, and strong. She stood beside it, proud but nervous. "It's yours," she said. "I want to give something back that isn't just survival." Jake turned the machine on, and it hummed to life. Bright lights filled the barn for the first time in years. He turned to her and said, "You just gave me more than power." He didn't say what he truly meant, not yet, but Raya understood. In a world that once saw her as a tool, or a prisoner, or a problem, she was now something more. She was needed, valued, and finally, free. The days passed quietly after the generator came to life. Jake's farm began to feel like a real home again. Lights stayed on through the cold nights. Water flowed clean from the taps. Raya and Melly moved through the house like they belonged. Not as guests, but as family. Even Rusty had started sleeping at Melly's feet every night, his tail gently wagging in dreams. But peace, like a candle in wind, can go out without warning. It started with a small cough. Jake thought maybe the girl had just caught a chill. The air in Verisix could be dry and sharp during storms, but by the second day, Melly was burning with fever. Her little body shivered even under thick blankets. Her cough turned into wheezing, and her skin turned pale gray. Raya didn't speak. She didn't cry either. She just stayed by her daughter's side, placing cool cloths on her forehead, whispering words in her native tongue. Jake brought food, medicine, whatever he had. But nothing worked. That evening, he found Raya staring at the sky. Her eyes were red, her face pale from exhaustion. "She's not getting better," she said quietly. Jake didn't know what to say. "I had some old meds in storage," he offered, "but maybe they're expired." Raya looked at him, her voice cracked. "She needs real treatment. The kind only Empire outposts have." Jake stepped back. "Are you saying we go to them?" Raya shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "But there's an abandoned medical supply station to sectors north, near the Ridge of Wind." Jake nodded slowly. "I know it, but it's dangerous," he said. "The storms there can kill a ship." "I'll go," she said. Jake raised an eyebrow. "You can't," he replied. "She needs you here. She needs you alive." That night, Jake packed supplies in silence. He checked his ship, an old hovercraft that hadn't flown beyond the valley in years. Raya helped quietly, fixing the stabilizers and patching the shield panel. Before sunrise, she stood by the ramp with Melly in her arms. "She won't survive another day without help," she whispered. Jake nodded and gently placed a hand on Melly's warm forehead. "Hang on, little one," he said. "I'll be back soon." The sky was still dark when Jake took off. The wind screamed around the ridge. dust and ice tearing at the ship like claws. The controls shook under his hands, warning lights flashing red and orange. But he kept going, thinking only of the tiny girl with eyes too bright to go dark. He reached the supply station after nearly crashing twice. It stood like a skeleton and the wind walls rusted, doors frozen, alarms long dead. Jake forced the doors open and stepped into silence. His boots crunched on cracked tile floors. He searched the shelves, praying something had been left behind. Then he found it, a small, sealed crate labeled Emergency Medical, Type A Respiratory Infections. He grabbed it, strapped it to his back, and turned to leave. Outside, the wind had picked up. The storm pushed against him like a living beast. One of the ship's wings tore slightly as he lifted off. He didn't care. He had what he came for. Back at the farm, Raya sat beside her daughter, whispering lullabies through a hoarse throat. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Her hands trembled as she cleaned Mellie's face for the 5th time that hour. She prayed not to gods, but to fate, to luck, to whatever watched over mothers and children. Then the sound came, a low hum in the distance. She stood, ran to the door, and saw it Jake's ship, battered but returning. She opened the hatch. Before he could even land properly, he stepped out, covered in sweat and grime. Without a word, he handed her the crate. Raya opened it fast, took the injector and the medicine, and ran to Mellie's side. Jake followed, his hands still shaking. From the flight, minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. Finally, Mellie stirred. She opened her eyes slowly and whispered, "Mommy." Raya broke into tears, holding her daughter close. Whispering thank you over and over, Jake sat on the floor, exhausted. Smiling through a pounding headache. "You did it," Raya said, looking at him with awe and disbelief. "No, Jake," replied softly, "we did it." That night, the 3 of them sat by the fire. Mellie slept in Raya's lap, her breathing steady and calm. Jake stirred the flames gently. He looked over at Raya and said, "I'd do it again." She looked back, her eyes full of something deeper than gratitude. "You already gave me back what I thought I'd lost forever," she whispered. "A future," and in that quiet night, with the storm outside now past, they knew they had survived something more than illness. They had survived fear and risk and hopelessness together. The storm had passed. But something else had stayed behind. A silence, soft and deep, wrapped around the small farmhouse like a warm blanket. Mellie's breathing was normal now, her little body strong again. She laughed. With Rusty in the garden, chasing the dog through tall, glowing grass under the twin moons of Verisix, Jake leaned on the porch rail, watching them. Raya stood beside him, arms folded, her expression calm but her eyes were busy, full of thoughts she hadn't spoken yet. Jake turned to her. "You don't have to worry anymore," he said. "She's going to be fine." Raya nodded. "I know," she whispered. "But now, I don't know what comes next." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Raya hesitated, then looked him straight in the eye. "You risked everything for us," she said. "The Empire could still come, and now you're part of it." "Too." Jake shrugged. "I've been alone too long," he said. "This place was just dust and silence before you 2 arrived." He looked back at the garden, where Mellie spun in circles, her arms wide. "Now it feels alive." Raya looked down at her hands. "You don't even know who I was before all this," she said softly. Jake smiled gently. "I don't need to," he replied. "I know who you are now." Later that evening, after dinner, Jake brought something into the living room. It was an old, dusty storage box, heavy and locked. Raya looked at it with curiosity. Jake knelt and opened it slowly. Inside were papers, medals, a faded photo of a woman with warm eyes, and an old military badge. "This was my wife," Jake said. Tapping the photo, Died 10 years ago during the first colony wars. Raya looked at the picture and then at Jake. You loved her, she said. Not as a question, but a truth. Jake nodded. I still do, he said. But I've learned something, love. Doesn't always mean holding on to what's gone. Sometimes it means opening your heart again. Even if it hurts, Raya didn't speak. She reached into the box and touched one of the medals. This was for saving lives. She read from the inscription. Jake smiled. Yeah, but I think saving you too means more than all of that. That night, Melly slept soundly in her room. Jake stood in the kitchen, drying dishes. Raya stepped in behind him, hands folded in front of her. She didn't say anything at first. Then she took a deep breath. If I stayed, she said softly, not just as a guest or a worker. If I stayed as your family, would you accept me? Jake turned, surprised by the words, You mean it? Raya nodded, her eyes wet but strong. I'm tired of hiding, she said. Tired of earning my place with fear and bargains. I don't want to stay because I owe you. I want to stay because I feel safe here. Jake looked at her for a long moment. Then he set the towel down, stepped closer, and gently took her hand. You don't have to ask permission to be part of this family, he said. You already are. She closed her eyes for a moment, like the words were something she had never believed she'd hear. Then she smiled, a real smile, full of warmth and sadness and healing. They stood like that for a while, hand in hand, the kitchen lights soft around them. Then Raya whispered, Melly already calls you Unc. Like Uncle Jake chuckled. Well, I guess that means I've been adopted. No, Raya said gently. It means she's ready for more than survival too. The next morning, Jake built a new bed frame, not because they needed it, but because he wanted to make a space for them real, permanent. Raya added new wires to the security system. Smiling as she worked, and Melly drew pictures of their little family. A tall human, a soft-eyed alien woman, a small giggling girl, and a floppy-eared dog. She taped the drawing to the wall and said proudly, This is home, that evening. As stars blinked to life above the plains, Raya sat beside Jake on the porch. She rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, Thank you for not seeing me as broken. Jake kissed the top of her head softly. You were never broken, he said. You were just waiting for someone to see the whole picture. And for the first time in a long time, Raya didn't feel afraid of tomorrow, because this time she wouldn't be facing it alone. The sun was just rising over Verisix when the warning came. A sharp screech filled the Iran-old defense sensor, long silent, now blaring. Jake dropped his tools and rushed outside. A single black ship hovered above the field, long and sharp. Like a blade, Empire insignia glowed red beneath its wings. Inside the house, Raya froze. She scooped Melly into her arms and whispered, It's them. Jake stormed back into the room, eyes fierce. You need to hide, he said. No. Raya replied, her voice steady. They're not taking us without a fight. Jake had built defenses into the land. Turrets hidden beneath rocks, motion sensors in the fence line, a jamming field under the barn. But he hadn't expected this ship, this fast, this armed, this. Angry, it landed hard, kicking up dust as its doors hissed open. 3 armored officers stepped out, followed by a fourth taller, more decorated. He spoke with a voice cold as metal. Jake Brennan. The officer said, You are under arrest for harboring a fugitive, assisting rebellion, and violating the Empire's shelter laws. Jake stood tall. She's not a fugitive. He said, She's a mother, a survivor. She fixed my systems. She saved my land. She doesn't deserve chains. The officer ignored his words. He turned to his men, searched the house. He ordered 2 of them moved forward with weapons drawn. Raya stepped into view, holding Melly behind her. Don't you touch her, she said, voice sharp like a blade. I'll come quietly if you leave my daughter and this man alone. Jake stepped between her and the soldiers. "No," he said. "This is my home. And they are my family." The officer narrowed his eyes. "Then you've chosen treason." He said. Jake didn't flinch. "I choose loyalty to the ones who saved me." The soldiers rushed forward, grabbing Jake by the arms. They forced him to his knees, pressed a shock band to his wrist. Raya cried out, trying to stop them, but was shoved to the ground. Melly screamed, hiding behind her mother. Jake looked at them as pain surged through him. "It's okay," he whispered. "Stay strong." But Raya wasn't done as the soldiers dragged Jake toward the ship. She crawled back into the house. She reached under the floor panel and pulled out something she hadn't touched in years, her old engineer's toolkit. Wires, codes. A data chip from the war days. She ran out the back door, circled around the barn, and reached the jammer's core. She plugged in the chip and activated a signal she had buried deep in memory. High above, a new signal lit the sky red and pulsing, a distress call used only by Empire engineers, a rebel fleet. Hidden in the shadows of nearby moons, picked it. Up in seconds, they recognized the code. They recognized the ID, Raya Velen. The ghost who had escaped the Empire's grip and vanished into exile. She was alive, and now she was calling for help. Back at the farm, the officers were preparing to take off with Jake. Then came the roar. A rebel gunship broke through the clouds. Followed by two fighters, the Empire soldiers froze as the rebel voice echoed through their comms. "Release the man and leave the system, or we will engage." Jake opened his eyes. Slowly, the soldiers were backing away, unsure. Then Raya stepped forward, holding her child in one arm and a data drive in the other. "This contains everything I built for the Empire," she said to the rebel ship above. "Energy layouts, codes, weaknesses, SIF. You want to break them? Take me," the rebel voice replied. "We want you safe, not surrendered." The Empire ship retreated, engines burning as it vanished into the sky. The rebels landed minutes later, soldiers rushing to embrace Raya like she was a legend. They thanked Jake, calling him brave, calling him one of them. Jake stood in silence as the wind cooled his face. Raya walked over to him and took his hand. "You didn't have to save us," she said. He smiled. "You didn't have to stay." She turned to the rebel captain. "Can we stay here?" she asked. "This is home now." The captain nodded. "We'll set up defense towers. Monitor the airwaves. You'll be safe here." As the sun set, Jake, Raya, and Melly stood on the hill behind the farmhouse. The stars blinked back into the sky. Rusty barked happily at the new rebel guards moving into place. Raya leaned against Jake and whispered, "They called you a traitor." He nodded. "Maybe," he said. "But if being loyal to you is betrayal, I'll wear that name proudly." And with that, the war outside their walls faded for a while. Inside, they had already won a family built not from blood, but from choice. A promise that no one would beg for food again. A bond that no empire could break.